everything deals with their ancient contracts to different demonic entities and the nations that serve those entities.
Welcome to Testimony Mountain. It's my joy to have Jessie back today and
Yes.
just want to welcome you all. We're going to be looking at some of the fall feasts and occult days that are coming up in preparation, as well as a little bit in hindsight on some of them. But Jessie, do you want to go ahead and share some of your background, where people can connect with you, what you've got going on?
Yeah, definitely. I've got lots of exciting stuff that kind of ties in with this. I've got a new workshop that will be kind of in a series, but it'll be available on my website, kingdomlivingwithjessie.com, and it's titled Architecture and Altars. So those really, the architecture and the altars that are at certain places really play into what we're talking about today, the ritual seasons that come into play, the feasts that come into play during the fall. And we can be able to identify where some of that, may be taking place based on the ritual rotations within the quadrants. So that series Architecture and Altars is on kingdomlivingwithjessie.com.
Wow, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's just dive in. I know the first one that we have coming up, by the time this airs, it will be over, but is Feast of the Beast. And so if you want to
Yeah.
share a little bit on that and what we can be praying into, or
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm going to start back just a little further, like with a little bit of history about that, because really what the seasons connect to in the fall is going to be different types of calendars that the system runs off of. And I've done a show on that on the calendars. You get different ancient groups like your Aztec, your Mayan, your Inca. That's where a lot of the fall is going to come in with the fire Shabbat ceremonies, and it deals with, as we look at all of these things, it's important to remember everything deals with their ancient contracts to different demonic entities and the nations that serve those entities. Many of them kept track of which entities they had to appease on their calendar systems. So that's how the calendars, come into play, because they would put the images of those entities on their calendars to remind themselves of, what season they had to appease each of those entities. So, as we get into, the marriage of the beast, it's everything for that begins to get prepped starting, I'd say end of July, beginning of August. And you get your first Shabbat festival around August 1st every year. And that is going to be a blood sacrifice time where they'll sacrifice both animals and, humans. Now, your Shabbat, like how it's kind of different is that, some of their ceremonies and rituals are going to be held inside while others will be outside because there'll be the elemental magic aspect to them. So your Shabbats usually are going to be outside and either in the high or the low places. So that's kind of the seasons that get kicked off. They're going to be gathering outside of places, rather, even in Israel, rather than in the temple grounds or the holy places, they're going to hold them outside in different areas. And, your Shabbats kind of are a series of feasts that are going to be more geared towards your sun gods. Um, different ones that they would consider like Ra, or you even can get Baal Moloch playing a part of that because of the fire, the infernal aspect to them. Even Ashtaroth will be included in that. Usually they'll use her Isis term because that's more connected with the sun than her Ashtaroth name. So some of the things that we saw in the month of August, like we could see the Jesuit Catholic Church preparing for these feasts. All of a sudden you had the Pope Leo, walking around, doing different things. Like it started where he did his parade and he had that big sunburst, you know, object that he carried outside of the gates. Then, he displayed it, declaring that they were going to canonize certain people as saints. All of that getting into different forms of necromancy that they're doing. But that also came with areas that, why does he, is it, let me maybe ask it a different way. Is he really canonizing people? Not really. They're calling on the dead and they're doing necromancy, and they name those people because it's about the land and the area.
Mhm.
And so what he was doing was identifying, you know, some major areas where they're going to be doing these certain ceremonies, and they're expanding their areas. So I did a show on that where I specifically outlined, the saints, where they came from, what were the major Jesuit Catholic churches in those areas. One of them, they don't have the one in Turkey, which watch Turkey because that's going to be the biggest one, I think, out of all that he named for this season.
Mhm.
But that area, they don't have the Jesuit Catholic Church. Instead, they have the Orthodox or they have apostolic churches. Um, so, those are going to be big areas where they're holding events. And he kind of was preparing that. And with that imagery of the sunburst that, he was using, um, you'll find that exact sunburst in older imagery of certain orders,
Hmm.
including the Order of the Pelican. And with that, what's the imagery that they display of the pelican? And I'll give a little sensitivity warning here. But the image that they display is that of a mother pelican basically stabbing herself and feeding her young her blood. So it really goes into vampirism as well as the cannibalization. So many of the churches that they'll pick, you'll see the depiction. They'll mark those churches with the Last Supper depiction.
Mhm.
It's not by accident, and it really is about them consuming flesh. So they begin to, kick off that season with the fire Shabbats. On August 3rd, you have your first satanic revels, which gets into, their sexual orgies. Then August 24th is Bartholomew's Day, which is the first, that's probably the largest fire Shabbat. And, they'll claim that it goes back to a time where priest and his whole congregation, the church and everything got burned down.
Mhm.
And that comes um, one day before. Let me just look up here so I can get it right because I want to get into the history because this gets into the Judaism. Let me see, it's August 25th, I think. But you get the Day of Omer,
Hmm.
August 25th. And that is observed by, um, the Jews, and it examines different things. Um, you get that going back to a time where you had a major, um, church and whole congregation. I think there was like over 30,000 disciples of this individual that were all killed. There was a plague that went out during that time, and that plague, took out a mass amount of disciples. And part of how they dealt with it was to burn everything. Um, but you get like a whole calendar system that goes off of that.
Hmm.
And that is all connected to your feasts of the sun gods. Um, so all of that is like, upcoming. And then September 7th is when you get the marriage to the beast. And those ceremonies will kind of go, that kind of kicks off your feast ceremonies, where you get some like your Feast of Marion and other ones. They're gonna, it's a high time where all your druids, your covens are gonna gather based on the different regions where they're doing the sacrificing. And you'll get like your some of your King of the Wood rituals. Um, so this time is one where they will kick those off in connection to you'll get like their worship of Addis, as well as Ceres, which are going to be your gods that oversee the corn harvest. I talked about, something I experienced in this where they do the burning of, like they don't fully burn it, but that's the fear, but they have what they call the Great Mother, and they'll do a huge effigy of corn. And they use that same effigy every year. So when you think about that, what happens to corn stalks? They dry. And so as they have new girls that they're gonna have go through the marriage of the beast ceremony, um, those young girls, and they'll have boys too, but they'll have to make corn husk dolls of themselves. All of those will be green. So, they don't burn, they just smolder. But they make the kids in the ceremonies, start it so it's smoldering and on fire. And they've got to cast it onto the effigy of the Great Mother. And the fear, the terror is that if that effigy burns, then the Great Mother's gonna come and hunt you. That's what they, tell the kids. And so there's a lot of fear in that. They're gonna connect it a lot, like preparing the kids through the catechisms, and they'll display the kids in their, and in this is like they're displaying them in almost wedding garments or wedding garment colors. It's like everything will be white. The little boys will wear, a shirt, and usually it used to be white shorts. They'd have, white knee-high socks and little white patent shoes, and then the girls would have frilly white dresses. They would actually make a lot of the churches would have the little girls wear veils with their catechism outfit, and then they would have the lacy socks and the little white patent buckle shoes. That was the common attire for it. We know that what is the color white represent really in the system? It represents the great white light, Lucifer. So that's part of their offering of the children to Lucifer. Um, so all the parents will buy the clothes because their kids are going through catechism. And, they think that it's a good thing that they've learned all this Bible stuff, but, we know that's not true. That's not what really happens. Most of the kids, like, um, will usually be about age 7 when they go through their first marriage to the beast ceremony. And then that will kick into their first midnight host ceremony on September 21st, which is where, they'll, um, really get into the consumption of the flesh. Now, it doesn't mean that they've never been forced to consume flesh before this. Usually their training starts at age 4.5 and 5, but this is when they're considered, that it's more of an understanding of that, like that you are entering into a contract with Lucifer with the beast, and this is one of the ways that, you know, the cover life, up to this point, children have been raised as Christian as well as Luciferian, having faith in God, believing in God, learning about Jesus, but then they begin to traumatize to impact that relationship. So the marriage to the beast and the midnight host ceremonies are connected to the blasphemies, which are taken, begin around age 7, where, at this point, that child is going to do the blasphemies, then to, um, you know, begin to really truly live a cover life. They're not gonna really have a relationship with God after that. It's all gonna be a cover. Um, so, both of those ceremonies are considered part of the blasphemies. Both are going to include a lot of sacrifices as well as, dismemberment. And the Midnight Host one is where they will get the Hand of Glories, the left hand, that they'll use in different, different times or different spells, different seasons, because they believe that will hold power. Um, so there's a lot that goes into that. Again, a lot of it, deals with their vampirism and cannibalism, you
And
know.
recently I became aware, and I don't know if you're aware of this, of an underwater kingdom equivalent to the marriage to the beast or feast to the beast. I don't know if Leviathan is used in that, but I was aware of, definitely the cannibalism and, the ritual that they do underwater, um, mermaids
Yeah.
and so on in that kingdom.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that. My experience was that you would have a gathering of, for these bigger ceremonies, you would have a gathering onto the land for those things,
Mhm.
where everything is held in a space where it has access to the high places and the low places, the water kingdoms being included in that.
Yeah,
Um, but I'm not sure if they do separate on top of that, but
yeah.
you know.
It seemed like it was coexisting, and I've been curious when you look at scripture, there's kind of above the earth, on the earth, and below the earth,
Hmm.
regions.
That
And
would be a
so,
good way to put it because
yeah,
there are like overlaps where, like the best or the easiest way to explain it, like, you know, y- like if I was in Chicago at a ritual, there could also be a ritual going on at in Germany, but it would be like there would be a spiritual veil. You could clearly see what was going on right in the other place. You could pass between them and literally be at both because you're observing both at one time, clearly seeing. So that's kind of a really great way to describe it to people. And you do get that connection as well with the higher and the lower kingdoms. So, you know, that's a great way to describe it to people, that how that's experienced by kids in the system.
yeah. And these things are terrifying in a way to talk about and to discuss. And yet, I think that it's helpful to know what the enemy is doing.
Hmm.
Paul talks about we are not ignorant of their devices and what they're doing,
Yeah.
so that we know how to be praying and how to walk this out, especially those of us who have a cult background that we're, working through, um, is to be able to know these things, process these things internally as well as externally. So,
And we have the authority to tear down the altars.
yes,
That's one of the things the Lord's given us. And in Deuteronomy, it says, if you will tear down the altars, then I will go before you and drive the enemy out of the land.
yes,
Um, that's exactly what the Lord's been doing. Even in like under the water, you have land under there.
yeah,
And, it's like the Lord doesn't specify. It's just simply, he's created all things, any land that the enemy's built an altar on. If we will tear up those altars, the Lord's going to drive them out of there.
Yeah, I agree. The confidence we can have in him.
Yeah.
Now, I know sometimes when you look at a satanic calendar, I know people who have compiled from, multiple groups and so on. It can feel overwhelming because almost every day, is some kind of cold day. Um,
Yeah,
but I think, we stand on, this is the day that the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it.
that's
And so
right.
we don't need to be afraid of these days, but be aware of them. And for survivors, be aware of some reactions that we might be having
Yeah.
emotionally or physically because of what we've been through. So,
And I think what helps too is trusting the Lord in that because, the Lord is aware of everything the enemy is doing. He's aware of everything the enemy tries to do you know, to basically steal, kill, and destroy the things that the Lord is doing. And I think it's easy as a survivor to feel a responsibility that, we have to be aware of everything. We have to try to stop everything. We have to create an awareness about everything. The Lord works. We don't need to do his work for him.
yeah,
So, it helped me to step back and to say, okay, I will trust the Lord that when he, wants me to be interceding, when he wants me to be praying over an area, he's going to alert me, hey, intercede and pray. Like I had that many years ago. um, the Lord led me through a period of time where He told me, that I was to be watching. And a couple of the areas that He had me have my eye on were Louisiana, Texas, and, primarily Texas. I mean, that was huge. And the Lord was showing me where to look and showed me what the problems were, like how the system was moving in that area. Then I began to reach out to senators, to schools, to different, social director groups and churches as well, and said, hey, are you aware of what's going on in your area? Like, I mean, I could literally see the movement of the kids and what was happening and was telling them right where things were going to happen. And at that time, nobody wanted, they didn't even want to look. They didn't want to, pay attention. They didn't want to know. And at one point, like the Lord had me, like I literally just took a notebook and put all the dates kind of, I had all the dates for the month on one page so I could see. And I just started writing in each day, like what events were going on, and I began to intercede when those events were happening. And, you know, it just kept getting worse. Like, rather than what, like usually what you'll see in a calendar system are events around the time frames given in the open scroll calendar. That's a normal ritual season. What's not normal is when you look and your calendar starts displaying 6 to 8 events a day. You're like, okay, something is, what in the world is going on in Texas, right? You're like,
yes.
hey, this is just not normal. Um, so I was really interceding and sometimes anywhere from 6 to 8 hours a day. And in that later, because in that season, I was the only one that, everyone in Texas I reached out to didn't respond. But later, that became one of the places, and we had several events there, but other Christians who came forward who said, hey, this matters to us. We want to take back this territory. We want to drive the enemy out of the land and destroy his altars. The Lord brought fruit through that, a greater fruit and harvest than, he redeemed what the others had not done. He gave it to those who were willing and blessed that. So it can be discouraging at times when you know, that mix between seeing what we see, feeling what we feel, feeling helpless, feeling like we can't really do much. Nothing is in vain. Intercession is powerful, and at times that's what is needed. The Lord's going to call you to do what is needed most. And, it's intercession is vital to the work being done on the land and in the areas,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, and even Ken and I spontaneously decided to go to a local church this Sunday just for the worship, and I was amazed at the level of witchcraft, sorcery, and
Mm,
oppression that we were able to intercede what we could. There was a woman on a stage, and she was painting what looked like to me a water portal. Um, and there was other things that were going on, and um, eventually we left, but we circled drove around praying, and later in the week, one of our housemates was just randomly, driving, uh, and we had told her about what we had experienced, and um, this place is difficult to see and find, but she actually happened to be driving by it, and the Lord highlighted it to her.
hmm
And she also went back behind it, and there were some woods and a trail, and some other things that the Lord highlighted. And so we're in a time of intercession for
Yeah,
um, some of these places in our region, and even churches that you think, oh, but these are churches, they've got to be full of the glory of God and all of that kind of thing, but not always. And so
right.
that's just being aware of what's going on around you. We're aware of a local coven that sometimes harass us and things like that. And like you said, knowing our authority in Christ, as well as being watchful and praying as the Lord leads, is so important as we walk this out. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
and then there's other days I know that are coming up this month. You know, the in the Jesuits, the feasts of the Lord, Rosh Hashanah, Day of Atonement, and Tabernacles are big occult days for the Jesuits. Um, and then, we're heading into Halloween and, other things. And so it's a time we want to be watchful and prayerful about that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again, those days are going to be signified with sacrifices, as well as feasting. Um, and it's difficult at times, like as we work through memories or things that are involved with that. I know for me, there were times or there's seasons where I feel it more heavy than others,
Mhm.
or where there's kind of like an overlooming, almost like a oppression that kind of falls, a darkness that falls on the land or the place. And the best way to approach that is just to really press into the Lord.
Yeah,
Don't be afraid or hesitant to work through memories. Um, don't feel hindered to do what makes you feel safe. Um, you know, I'm usually the type where, there's been times where I've had to, notify friends or say, hey, check on me because this is a high season and there's just something about this season that really feels revved up and I don't feel safe. It's okay to express that at times and to admit that. What are some things that do help? I found, like, let me think how to put it. Like, at times our bodies auto respond,
yes,
and you can't help those auto responses. You can't control them. But what you can do is, allow the Lord and minister to yourself in that. Um, for many, those are times where, everything within you clams up. You feel like you have to be silent. You almost can't speak. But that's really what's needed, is to be able to get it out somehow. One of the things I found that helps me in that is to just have something in my hands, like a heat pack, because sometimes I'll get where my body will just go cold or numb. And if I at least have something that I can play with or, in my hands or feel,
Mhm,
something that keeps me warm or, blankets, along with a heat pack, that will help me. Also, putting yourself, um, like with a back against a wall,
mhm,
uh, in a space where you can see all the windows, all the doorways. Positioning yourself in that way helps. Um, don't put yourself in a time, in a season like that. Don't put yourself in a place where, it's going to add to the stress, the fear, the anxiety. A lot of times just being able to see and hear everything, especially at night,
mhm,
that will really help you. Putting on things like sometimes I'll just put something general on, like rain sounds, or a worship instrumental that really ministers to my heart. And I will pull out my Bible and I open it up and place it near me. Even at times putting it right in the bed with me,
mhm.
open. And just having where I can reach out and touch the word and know, say, okay, Lord, I know you're with me. I know you're faithful to keep your promises. And you are my protector. You are my strength. You are my stronghold. Send your angels to encamp about me. Go walk your property, anoint it, anoint your house, anoint yourself, and, put on confidence and boldness, that such a great authority has been given to us. We're not those who are bound or sitting in darkness any longer. We're those that have been redeemed and set free, and the light and the glory of God's presence is with us. So let the enemy come. It's like, let him come. Let let him come and let him see the glory of the Lord.
Yes,
Um, so minister to yourself in that. Allow the Lord, the Holy Spirit, to minister to you in that. Um, rather than these seasons being times of oppression and making us feel, again, downtrodden, use it as a time to rise up,
yes.
to, display the glory of the beauty that the Lord's given you, with great courage, great boldness, you know.
Totally agree. And especially, highlighting that walking your property. We had done this early on and actually had, put stakes with Bible verses in the four corners.
Hmm.
And, then life happens and, we had our regular routines of worship and prayer, but we hadn't been on the property as much. And this week we went out and walked the property again. And it was interesting that the two front stakes on the front corners of the property were missing, were gone. And
Hmm.
there were some
Huh?
interesting rock that had been placed in certain places that we didn't do, that was like, okay,
Yeah.
something's going on here, and so we took care of that and,
Yeah.
restaked it and prayed through. And as a household, we're just looking at through this season, at least this month, regularly that, various ones of us are going to be walking the property day and night. You know,
Yeah.
not everybody has to do that. It's doing what is the Lord saying to do,
Exactly.
in
Yeah.
those seasons.
And the times for it too. I've had to stand firm in mine. Um, I had times like right after I first anointed, I've lived in a place for quite a long time and never had issues, but all of a sudden I had five crows out of nowhere. And so I rebuked them. And when I rebuked them and cast them out of my yard, because I didn't just feel like they were just birds,
Yeah.
um, it felt like that witches were coming to kind of harass, right? And so I rebuked them, and they went just right across the street,
Mhm.
just on the other side of the road, sat there, cawed at me. And I was like, no, you don't even have authority to be in my
Yeah.
neighbor's yard, right? So then they went down the hill and sat at the property there. And I was like, oh no.
No.
I was like, you're not even going to be in the area. Goodbye.
Yeah.
So then no activity for a while, right?
Mhm.
But then get this, just this week, I'm driving home up into our area, and all of a sudden have five vultures. I was like, really?
Yeah.
Our area doesn't even have vultures. It's a public area. It's like, where in the world did vultures come from? I was like, I don't think so. Goodbye.
We had that recently too, which would be interesting if we figured out the dates. But it was a couple of
Yeah.
weeks ago, and it was our neighbor's property, and we went out to walk. And at first, there was five on their roof. It was weird. I never.
Right?
And then we walked down and we walked back, and now there was 10 on the roof. And we did some more walking, and then there was 12. And that's, we're like, okay, this is not natural, to
No,
have
it's
12
like,
buzzards on somebody's
right, it's like
roof,
we've never had anything like that ever, and all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, it's like this is crazy.
Yeah,
I think it's all Satanists in disguise. I've been rebuking them. I haven't seen them since I rebuked them,
yeah.
so that tells me even more that I think it was Satanists
Yes.
in disguise, you know?
And I knew that they couldn't come on our property, but they were intimidating. They were trying to intimidate our household,
Hmm.
and so it's like, nope, not doing this. So
Right?
yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah,
things
I'd be
like that.
curious if anybody else all of a sudden had an influx in the past couple weeks with
Yeah.
seeing vultures out of nowhere.
So definitely comment below if you have, because we'd like to
Yeah, I'd
untrack
be
some of that.
curious to see on that. Yeah, because it's interesting because they do like how they target believers in groups, and if they're all kind of on the same agenda, they're going to be targeting people who are strong believers, across the globe, and you know.
The challenge we've had is, and it seemed like whenever I would go away, that the local coven would send owls. They would come in the form of
Hmm.
owls. And so, these are things we become aware of and learn how to pray and,
Right?
you know, stand in the authority God's given us. But yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. And I always pray with that. Like particularly when I think of ravens and they use ravens, I always think back to the passage how the Lord used the ravens to supply the need for Elijah
Yeah.
when Jezebel and all was after Elijah for taking out the prophets of Baal.
Mhm.
And, don't be afraid to command that. The Lord gave the command to the ravens then. I include all birds of prey,
Yeah.
that they shall supply the meat for God's people and the provision. Not that we all want that in particular, but it's like the Lord, when I think about it, what does the meat really represent? It represents the word of God. So it's like, Lord, would you put your word, bind it to their tongues, that they can speak no false lies, they can speak no curses against me, they can only bless me with your words of blessing.
Yes.
Let that be found on their lips. Let that be what's delivered to my ears coming from them. Your praise, your glory, your honor. That's what I want to hear coming out of their lips.
Yes. It's so good. And I think when we take things that the enemy is doing and we get to flip it, because
Yeah.
our God is more powerful and we don't need to be afraid. And so, when we come up to these events and these time periods, instead of pulling back in fear, we get to move forward in, okay, Lord, how do you want to be lifted up and glorified on this day? Um,
Yeah.
and so, like, I know the Day of Atonement is coming up. I think it's October 3 and 4 or something. No, 1 and 2. Anyway, somewhere in there, first part of August. And, um, last year memories surfaced of, what that was like for me and some of the training, um, because the Day of Atonement, it was like a great slaughter. It was like rivers of blood was kind of the
Hmm.
chant all night long rituals. But the mentality and what you are ingrained in the cult parts is I have to be the savior of the world type of thing,
Mm.
is kind of that savior of the world programming. I have to do this because we got to save the world and bring in the new world order and all of that. Um, and so being able to speak the truth, to any part of us that's still believing those types of things, and
Hmm.
being able to exalt, the true savior of the world, which
Yeah.
is Jesus. And to me, that's the good news, that we get to tell
Hmm.
ourselves, our parts, and others is we don't have to do all these rituals all this time. There is one true and living Lord
He
who
did it.
who did
Yeah,
it.
he did it.
We
Yeah.
don't have to. We
It's
don't
a
have to do that.
fulfilled, a completed work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's what begins to shift any cult loyal parts out of that place,
Hmm.
is when they can see that contrast.
Yeah.
And sometimes in prayer, that's what we ask, Lord, would you demonstrate to them the truth of who you are, your
Hmm.
power and your love, you know. And then there's an outside expression of that to, former or to cult members who are still in the cult, is being able to release that invitation of the Lord, you know,
Right.
you don't have to keep doing what you're doing. I am believing for a mass exodus from the cult system, you know.
Yeah, I am too.
Don't know what it's going to
Yeah.
look like, but, want to be
Yeah.
prepared because as many come out, um, they need to know the truth and the hope and the joy and the restoration that's available. So
Yeah.
it's exciting.
It is exciting. And, I believe for that too. And it's interesting that, you're bringing this up. I know, in my Kingdom Living TV series, I've got shows coming up on this topic about the atonement, the
Mhm.
fulfilled work of Christ, how that impacts, our relationship with him as well as with one another. And, that's the first part the enemy attacks is our belief,
Yes.
that and gets our faith off of the work Christ has done onto, it gets into the perfectionism, the false gospel, which is a gospel of works, and you need to save, you need to, and there will always be a falling short in that
Yeah.
because we all fall short of the glory. We can't do it. We weren't the one chosen to do that. Christ was.
Yes.
Um, so, it's interesting when we look at that connection and then even how that's part of the overall glory of God. You have the Father and the Son being one in that, both in name as well as in every aspect. Um, but yeah, it is the season, I think, and I appreciate that, we're able to bring together both. You get more your Luciferian side, you get the Jewish, you know, connected to the uh Jesuits as well as your Sanhedrin, all of that getting into ancient times, seasons, and events, and their preparation work to make that one world order,
Mhm.
which we know scripturally, you know, there's only a point. The Lord's already appointed what shall happen in those days. Nothing, will be done beyond that, and there
Mhm.
will be a day it comes to an end,
Yes.
and that's going to be in the valley of Jezreel. But um, all of that, I think it's exciting at the same time because as we step into our faith, as we put on our confidence, we also know that the season is a time of great miracles. It's a time
Yes.
where the Lord's going to display his power, his might, his authority. And, you know, every knee shall bow, every tongue
Yes.
shall confess that Jesus Christ is the Lord. That we can stand on. We know that to be true.
So agree with that. And that's the hope we have. We get to walk in
Yeah.
step by step, knowing, who ultimately wins. You know, and I think we can get sometimes discouraged when we look at, what's going on down here.
Yeah.
And then that's where we get to go, okay, God, you know, this looks terrible and horrible. It looks like, what do we do? But when we lift our eyes up to see what his plans are, um, that gives us the hope and confidence to keep moving forward. So
Yeah, absolutely.
really good. Anything else you want to add today?
I think that's a good reflection on what we've got going on right now. And
All right.
yeah.
Well, I hope this is encouraging to those of you who are watching, and just want to encourage you to be hearing from the Lord, stepping into what He's calling you to do in restoration. And I believe all of us have a part, survivors and non survivors. And in fact, I think that survivors need non survivors to walk alongside them, and to be, there is, like information that we have from the cult system that non survivors don't have. And I
Hmm.
think that as we learn how to work together and walk this out, there is a greater unity and power in walking in what God has for us. And so just encourage all of you, as we walk this out, to go, what is my part? What is your part? Let's work together to see his kingdom come, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And
I
so,
couldn't agree more.
yeah. So thank you, Jessie, so much for being on today. And I just want to encourage those of you who are watching to like, subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear this and understand more the times and seasons that of the Lord, and how we can walk in overcoming. And so we just bless you, and we'll see you next time on Testimony Now.